The destroyer's searchlight swept the water like an accusation, bright, cruel, cutting. It passed over our bow and missed by inches. For a breathless second, we were simply a dark silhouette against the ocean. Engines idled. The night swallowed our wake. 23 of us pressed flat to the deck of PT-164, every muscle taut, waiting to become invisible. Behind that single destroyer rode 3 Japanese transports, hulks of cold steel and shadow, loaded with nearly 8,000 enemy soldiers bound for Kalimbangara. They thought they were safe in the black teeth of Solomon's night. They didn't know the clock was against them. They didn't know that in 4 minutes we would pull the darkness open and drop hell through it. My hands never forgot how to hold the twin .50 caliber mount. My knuckles ached from the squeeze. Beside me, Ensign Robert Dutch Vanderberg whispered range and bearing into the skipper's ear, Lieutenant Commander Arthur M. McPherson, Mac, to us. The little green phosphorescent glow of our compass was the only light any of us dared show. Behind us, tucked into a moonshadow carved by Vela La Vela's volcanic spine, PT-168 and PT-171 waited like coiled snakes. People call them toys in scrapbooks and textbooks, wooden speedboats with engines that screamed. But they were our weapons. We were America's secret, small, silent, and sudden. I'm Chief Petty Officer Tom Harrigan, United States Navy Reserve. I was among the first to prove that a plywood boat with guts and speed could make steel sink. When people ask me what it was like, I try to find the right words. Mostly, there weren't words. There was only the work: check the torpedoes, grease the bearings, listen to the sea breathe, wait for the order that might be your last. The truth is, we were too busy trying not to die to think about history. But when you knew what hung in the balance, when failure meant thousands of fresh graves and parents forever waiting for a telegram, you did what had to be done. Every torpedo was a promise of lives saved. Every transport sunk meant boys in the bush would get a chance to live. To understand why 3 little boats could threaten the Imperial Navy at the height of its power, you have to understand what they had mastered: the night. Since Tsushima's echo faded and Solomon's war turned savage, the Japanese had made darkness their domain. They trained for it. They moved by sight and discipline. They called their runs the Tokyo Express. We called it the Rat Run. Their destroyers and escorts were professional killers at night, fast, coordinated, precise. The U.S. Navy at the time was built for big ocean battles, the doctrine of Rangoon battles and line-of-battle engagements. Our big ships were powerful in open water, but in the sea with reefs, islands, and narrow straits, they became lumbering targets. We needed something the Japanese didn't expect. We needed speed, audacity, and surprise. So someone in workshops between New Orleans and New York began to build what every admiral scoffed at. 80 feet of laminated mahogany plywood with the heart of an aircraft engine, 3 Packard V-12s tuned to howl, and a skeleton crew trained to be savage. 4 21-inch torpedo tubes. A 20mm Oerlikon. .50s and 0.30s that spat like angry wasps. Enough ammo to make 15 frantic minutes of hell. After that, you were either heading home on fumes or you were simply gone. I first saw a PT boat at Melville, Rhode Island, in February 1943. I'd been on convoy duty in the North Atlantic, and the Navy was recruiting volunteers for experimental craft. That's what the flyer said, nothing about casualty rates or wooden hulls. 200 men volunteered, 40 were chosen. Why me? Maybe because I could navigate by stars, maybe because I'd spent summers in small boats on the Chesapeake. Maybe because I didn't have enough sense to be afraid. When I stepped aboard PT-164, I thought they'd lost their minds. This was not a warship. It was a speedboat with delusions, no armor, cramped bunks that were nothing but wooden shelves, fuel, and ordnance sitting near the crew like open threats. One rifle round could splinter us. But McPherson made it all make sense. He was 28, old in PT terms, with a face like a map of hard lessons. He'd been at Pearl Harbor on a destroyer. He'd volunteered after Midway. "I'm tired of being a target," he told us. "Time to be the hunter." Mac saw what others didn't. PT boats were not built for broadside battles. You didn't trade steel for steel, you struck like a fist in the dark. We were maritime guerrillas, ambush, hit, vanish. That required a strange crew, misfits, rogue mechanics, mathematicians, ex-submariners, hot rod engine men. Dutch Vanderberg was a Yale math man who could solve a torpedo firing equation without thinking. Charlie Mendoza from Los Angeles could find 3 more horsepower in the packets with a wrench and a prayer. Sparks Patterson had come from the quiet world of subs, where radios were used like whispers. He taught us to be silent on the air. Paddy O'Brien, our torpedo man, handled Mark 13s like they were living things, cleaning them, whispering to the wooden shafts like a lover coaxing a secret out. Training at Melville was brutal. The Navy learned quickly that enthusiasm alone wouldn't keep a plywood boat afloat under Japanese fire. We practiced high-speed runs until vomiting was normal. We learned to aim torpedoes at 40 knots over rough water, to read wakes and currents, to fire from a rolling deck without ceremony. We navigated by dead reckoning, by stars, by the smell of land. Commander Wild Jim Patterson ran the school like a pirate's academy, lessons in cruelty, more lessons in trickery. They expect you to be afraid of the dark, make them afraid of it instead. By June 30, 1943, we were at Renova, not a proper base but a line of camouflaged Quonset huts, a lurching dock, and a fuel cache. Around us, the war had teeth, artillery thumped across New Georgia, Marines bled for Munda Airfield. Our squadron, Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron, 9, had 12 boats tasked with strangling Japanese reinforcements between the big bases and the frontline islands. In theory, our mission was simple: interdict convoys. In practice, the water was a maze of coral heads, narrow straits, and coast watcher eyes. The Japanese had float planes, patrols, and destroyer hunter-killer groups. On our first patrol, July 5, disaster found us. A float plane saw us, and 4 Japanese destroyers converged in an instant, searchlights, 5-inch guns. PT-158 blew apart with a single hit. 12 men gone. We scattered. That night, Mac was quiet. "We can't fight their fight," he said. "We do our own." We learned quickly. Quiet hulls and engine management became doctrine. Run on one engine at low throttle to lower the acoustic signature, then pop all 3 for the strike. Use island radar shadows. Coordinate attacks with simple lamp signals so the enemy's radios couldn't hear us. Rely on coast watchers, lone Allied eyes on Japanese-held islands, who risked death to send us enemy positions. Rely on Solomon Islanders who paddled through reefs to bring us news. Sometimes Pearl Harbor sent decrypts, more often, we hunted by instinct and terror. PT boats were secret. Official communiques never named them. The Navy called them mosquito boats or small craft. The Japanese reports at first said submarines or mines. They could not conceive that wooden speedboats could cause such carnage. That ignorance became our shield. On July 18, the Coast Watchers relayed what we'd been waiting for, a reinforcement convoy through Blackett Strait bound for Vila, Kolombangara, 3 transports and 2 or 3 destroyer escorts carrying an element of the Japanese 13th Regiment. These were not laborers. They were battle-seasoned troops who could make Munda a bloodbath for our men. Commander William Bill Speck told us bluntly, "If that convoy gets through, Marines die. You make sure they don't." We prepared like men preparing for a wedding no one wanted: torpedo checks, fuel checks, ammunition set to API and incendiary, tracer rounds every 5th round. Paddy set the Mark 13s for a 10-foot run depth and 28 knots, the best compromise for hitting a heavily laden transport. Charlie tuned our packets, mufflers fitted to throat out noise. Dutch replotted the approach against the moon's phase and currents until he'd drawn lines on the chart like a surgeon marking skin. At 20:30, we slipped the moorings. The 3 boats drifted out in column, engines idling. We ran a quick live-fire shakedown of guns into nothing, then silence again, only the hiss of water and the far rumble of artillery on New Georgia. At 23:47 Sparks picked up the Coast Watcher, 3 large ships, 2 escorts, bearing 280, 18 knots, range 15 miles. The hunt was on. We crept forward at 5 knots, letting the convoy come to us. A slow predator. At 0001, Dutch saw them as dark shapes against the starfield. 2 destroyers leading, 3 transports, a sterning destroyer bringing up the rear. No lights. Perfect spacing. When Mac clicked 3 times on the radio, all 3 boats surged. We hit them at 40 knots, slicing between destroyers in a move that would make any textbook explode from shame. There's no glamour in that moment, only pure, raw terror and precision. 3 plywood boats threading a needle between steel knives. I remember the spray in my face, tracers reaching for the sky, the smell of cordite and fuel. I opened up the twin .50s and raked the bridge of the nearest destroyer. Sparks flew, steel shattered. Patty fired our first 2 fish from 600 yards. The torpedoes leapt from their tubes like mechanical sharks, leaving twin-wake ghosts in the phosphorescent water. The first transport took the first torpedo after the bridge, boom, an explosion like someone ripping the night's skin open. The second hit amidships, and the hull broke like a snapped tree. The bulk of that 8,000-ton monster tipped, split, and began its long fall into darkness. Men tumbled from rails into oil-slick water and screamed, an awful sound that even now claws at the memory. PT-168 put both torpedoes into the second transport. The ammunition and fuel she carried turned her into a volcano. I was knocked flat by the blast wave. Flaming wreckage rained over us. For a second, our deck was aflame, and the smell of burning timbers filled the night. The destroyers were frantic. They couldn't depress their main batteries low enough without risking their own transports. Their solution was to try to ram. One swung its bow for us. Mac turned hard, throttled beyond limits, and we cleaved past with inches to spare. I fired full belt into the enemy bridge at point-blank range and heard the crunch and sparks of steel under fire. PT-171 wasn't so lucky. Searchlights found them, cannons stitched the bow with holes, and a near hit tore a torpedo casing. Joey Antonelli had to pull out of smoking and the wounded. By the time we launched our last fish, the night had turned into a riot of tracer bursts and shell bursts, water exploding around us like meteors. Paddy launched his final 2 torpedoes at the last transport. The captain combed the wakes and both passed harmlessly along his hull. We were away, motoring for our lives, 3 engines at full throat, weaving through splash and shock. PT-168, bleeding but still fierce, managed one last hit on the second transport that finished her off with secondary explosions. When the smoke cleared, 2 transports burned and sank. Nearly 6,000 Japanese soldiers never reached Kolombangara. We limped back to regroup 5 miles south. PT-171 was bleeding holes at the waterline and had 1 engine dead. We tossed stretchers, plugged holes with mattresses and life preservers, and took aboard wounded men. PT-168 had lost her radio mast, our boat bore shrapnel and scorch marks. Somehow, we had survived. Return was no sanctuary. Float planes were already up at first light. We hid among island shadows, palms used as camouflage, engines of, and every man frozen in place as enemy aircraft droned past. It took 14 hours to get back to base. Exhaustion and adrenaline blurred our faces during the debrief. Intelligence officers wanted everything: reaction times, gun calibers, torpedo performance, searchlight patterns. What we told them would be fed into doctrine and training for every PT unit across the Pacific. The strategic effect was immediate. Japanese radio traffic spoke in tones we'd never heard: frustration, disbelief. Reports came in of mysterious fast boats appearing out of nowhere. For the first time, the Imperial Navy was afraid of the dark. Their freedom at night was gone. Convoys became fewer and larger, with double or triple the escorts. Searchlight-equipped floatplanes started sweeping at night. Their supply lines choked. Fewer men, fuel, and ammunition reached frontline garrisons. Our Marines on New Georgia gained breathing room to fight, to live, to kill, or hold ground. The psychological blow proved as powerful as the tactical. What we had done with 3 boats spoke louder than numbers. The Japanese commanders hated uncertainty more than anything. Once they suspected PT boats were everywhere, and they did suspect, they had to respond. She who responded consumed resources. They created hunter-killer groups and special shallow draft destroyers. They tried decoys, new reconnaissance patterns, and night air patrols. For every answer they found, we found 2 ways to slip between them. But victory has a ledger. 2 weeks after our run, PT-166 hit a mine on return and went down with all hands. PT-162 was trapped in daylight after engine failure and was cut to pieces. Joey Antonelli, who'd come close to death that night, was later killed by a sniper while refueling. By October, our squadron had lost 7 boats and 73 men. It was a brutal exchange. For every Japanese hull we sank, a brother might not come home. But the boats were replaceable, the enemy crews and commanders, often not. In the cruel arithmetic of war, we could afford losses they could not. I came back to the Pacific in March 1944 as XO of PT-321 in the Philippines. The boats were better, radar in some, armor plates around cockpits, and more reliable torpedoes. The essence remained: speed, surprise, audacity. We developed Wolfpack tactics, coordinated multi-boat strikes from multiple axes. We used radio silence and light signaling to coordinate. We learned to use shore batteries as false targets to draw fire and reveal enemy positions. We inserted coast watchers behind enemy lines, moved supplies to stranded troops, and evacuated downed aviators. We became the Navy's Swiss Army knife, useful for anything too dangerous for conventional ships. The human cost never left us. Men cracked. Men became addicted to the rush and volunteered for ever riskier missions. Our humor grew black to protect fragile minds. We named boats Sudden Death, Hell's Angels, and Grim Reaper. We painted cartoon torpedoes and sang obscene songs to keep afraid from swallowing us whole. We built rituals, maintenance like a religion, coffee like a sacrament, the roll call like a litany. And there were ghosts beyond us. The coast watchers, lonely Australians and islanders, sat for months, reporting Japanese movements with a radio and binoculars, risking execution if caught. Their courage saved lives and shaped our attacks. Native Solomon Islanders paddled out through reefs with information and rescue, paying with their freedom and often their lives. We owed them everything. Over time, technology changed our craft. Early radar was crude as a child's toy. It couldn't always distinguish a reef from a ship, but by late 1944, we had sets that could spot targets in fog and total night. Japanese night vision training lost its edge when we could see them first. Torpedo improvements reduced dud rates. Rocket launchers and primitive guided munitions began to appear on some boats. But technology alone would never be enough. This war was a test of nerve and improvisation. We did more than sink ships. We seeded paranoia in the enemy's mind. Officers who had once laughed at plywood craft now ordered convoys to circle constantly, add destroyer escorts, waste fuel on patrols, and cancel offensives because they couldn't be sure supply lines would hold. Men in forward garrisons waited for reinforcements that never came and lost hope. An empire that had once moved with the confidence of a tidal wave now hesitated because the night itself might hide a killing machine. After the war, some of the boys went home and became quiet men. Mac stayed in the Navy, earned the Navy Cross and 2 Silver Stars, and later led destroyers in Korea. Dutch returned to Yale and became a leading oceanographer, mapping currents he'd once dodged under fire. Charlie Mendoza opened a speed shop in Los Angeles and turned hot rods into legends. Patty O'Brien wrote the maintenance manual on Mark 13s that served long after the war. The names drifted into the quiet of peacetime, their stories reduced to footnotes in dusty archives. But we knew, every torpedo we fired, every dark mile we snuck through, had changed the war. The Japanese never truly adapted. They tried hunter-killer groups, radar destroyers, suicide boats, and even counter-PT brigades, but they could not be everywhere. They could not make the night safe again. The presence of a few hundred wooden boats had consequences that rippled through strategy and morale far beyond the numbers on any tally sheet. PT boats marked a shift in naval thinking. They proved asymmetric warfare at sea. Small, nimble, and cheap platforms could impose strategic costs and force an opponent to change calculus. The lineage from those plywood speedsters extends to modern fast attack craft, to missile boats, to the literal warfare doctrines navies still study today. So when people ask if we were afraid, the answer is simple: yes. Terrified, many times over. But fear doesn't mean paralysis. It sharpens the edge of courage. We learned to live with fear, to use it, to sharpen it into something that let us move through darkness when others fled. Years later, I sit with photographs and yellowed clippings on my desk, and I can still hear the engines, the high keen of Packard V12s, over the Solomon's water. The salt spray in my nostrils is as vivid as the day. I still taste the coffee black enough to float a wrench and remember the laughter that came after near misses, the songs we made to mock death. Most of all, I feel pride, not the loud, flag-waving kind, but a steady, stubborn pride that we did what we had to do. We were small, fast, and deadly. We came from broken lives and quiet towns. We were volunteers, reckless in youth and disciplined by necessity. We did not win the war by ourselves. Carriers and submarines and armies took cities and sank fleets. But the PTs changed the night, and changing the night changed the war. We turned the shadows into hunting grounds. We tore the myth of invincibility from the enemy that had once dominated the Pacific. The last operational PT was retired in 1959. Their wooden bones rotted or were burned for firewood. But in every fast attack craft, every special operations boat, every doctrine that prizes speed and surprise, there is a ghost of those plywood hulls and the men who rode them. The Japanese were stunned, yes, but more than that, they were afraid. They learned to fear an enemy that came from nowhere and vanished like smoke. They learned that imagination could be a weapon, that audacity often outgunned a ship. That is the legacy of the Mosquito Fleet, a small idea that roared like thunder in the dark and helped change the course of a global war. When people ask me if I'm proud of what we did, I tell them about that night off Vela La Vela, about engines that stopped and then screamed, about torpedoes that leapt, about men who laughed even as they prayed. I tell them about boys who grew into men with a new definition of courage. I tell them we were fleet only in spirit, a handful of wooden boats that haunted an empire's nights until the tide of war broke against them. We struck from the shadows because that's where we were strongest. We struck because there was no other choice. The sea remembers. If you lean close at night, you can still hear it whisper our names. And in that whisper is the truth of what we did: small boats, heavy burdens, and a nation that refused to be beaten. We were the Mosquito Fleet. We were the secret weapon. We were the men who learned to make the dark belong to us. And because of that, the sun rose on a different world.